Why open relationships don't work long term. Open relationships promise freedom, honesty, and expanded love. And for many couples, that promise feels refreshing, even revolutionary at times. The openness, the transparency, the idea of loving without limits can feel like stepping into a more evolved version of partnership. But as appealing as this freedom initially feels, the very qualities that make open relationships exciting often become the same forces that quietly erode the foundation of trust, stability, and emotional safety needed for long term commitment. While they can succeed for a select few, most people eventually find that the complications outweigh the benefits. Here's why open relationships often don't stand the test of time. Open relationships are frequently portrayed as the modern, enlightened alternative to traditional monogamy, more flexible, more honest, more in tune with today's rejection of outdated rules. And at the beginning, many couples feel exactly that, liberated. The ability to explore new connections while maintaining a primary relationship can seem like the ideal blend of independence, intimacy, a way to have emotional depth without sacrificing personal freedom. But as months turn into years, many couples discover that open relationships introduce emotional, psychological, and logistical challenges that are far more difficult to navigate than they expected. Feelings shift, expectations evolve, reality replaces idealism, and with time, the cracks become harder to ignore. Open relationships do work for some, usually for those with exceptional communication skills, strong emotional resilience, and deeply aligned values. Yet for most couples, the emotional terrain becomes too complicated, too uneven, or too draining to sustain. What starts as an empowering agreement can slowly transform into a maze of jealousy, comparison, and emotional disconnection. We're going to talk about the key reasons why these relationships fall apart, not because people fail the relationship structure, but because the structure itself often asks more of the human heart than most of us can reasonably give. Why love isn't infinitely divisible. Let's look at an evolutionary perspective on attachment. On paper, openness sounds fair and rational. The rules are clear, the expectations are discussed, and everything appears grounded in logic and emotional maturity. But human emotional systems didn't evolve on paper. They evolved through lived experience, survival pressures, and deep biological wiring. Feelings don't follow agreements, they follow attachment. From an evolutionary standpoint, human beings are a pair bonding species. Anthropologists have long noted that while humans are socially flexible, most cultures across history prioritize one primary emotional bond at a time. This isn't merely cultural conditioning, it's supported by biology. Attachment theory, first developed by John Bowlby, shows that humans form deep emotional bonds designed to provide safety, regulation, and stability. These bonds activate the nervous system in ways that are not easily duplicated or even distributed. Jealousy is often dismissed as an insecurity or immaturity. It is better understood as an attachment alarm system. Neuroscience shows that emotional threat, especially the threat of losing a primary bond, activates the same stress responses as physical danger. The release of cortisol, the tightening of the body, the spike in anxiety all occur. In other words, jealousy is not a moral failure. It is a physiological response to perceived relational risk. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, further complicates the idea of equal love. Oxytocin strengthens emotional attachment through repeated intimacy, shared vulnerability, and consistency. Research suggests that while humans can care for many people, deep emotional bonding is neurologically hierarchical. One bond tends to sit at the center, providing the greatest sense of safety and emotional regulation. When that central bond feels threatened or diluted, the nervous system reacts as if stability itself is at risk. Anthropologically, even societies that practiced forms of non monogamy rarely emphasized emotional equality among partners. Power dynamics, primary partnerships, or ranked relationships were common. The modern idea that multiple deep emotional bonds can coexist without hierarchy is relatively new and largely ideological rather than biological. When a partner begins forming deep emotional intimacy with someone else, the internal landscape shifts. This sense of security that once felt solid begins to wobble. Comparison emerges almost automatically, not because someone is shallow, but because the brain is scanning for survival relevance. Am I still chosen first? Am I still central? Am I still safe? Over time, these emotional microfractures accumulate. What begins as a manageable discomfort can evolve into chronic unease. Even with open communication and good intentions, emotional safety can quietly erode. Fewer unguarded moments, more self monitoring, less willingness to rely fully on the bond. Trust doesn't usually collapse all at once. More often, it thins, slowly replaced by a low grade instability that the body never fully relaxes from. This is not a failure of character or emotional intelligence, it is the reality of the human attachment system. Humans are capable of caring deeply for many people, but we are not wired to distribute primary emotional attachment equally without cost. When a core bond feels divided, the nervous system interprets it as danger, and over time, living in that state can weaken even the strongest connection. One partner usually wants open relationships more than the other. Most open relationships don't begin with two people simultaneously saying, let's open things up. More often, one partner suggests it, gently, cautiously, or sometimes impulsively, and the other agrees because they want to be supportive, flexible, or in many cases, because they're afraid of losing the relationship altogether. The initial yes can feel cooperative and loving in the moment, but beneath it often lies an imbalance that doesn't appear right away. It hides quietly at first, masked by excitement, curiosity, or the desire to prove that you're the kind of partner who can adapt. But over time, that imbalance begins to surface in subtle ways. Common patterns look like this. One partner receives more attention, more dates, or more romantic interest, while the other struggles to find meaningful outside connection, creating insecurity and a sense of falling behind in your own relationship. One partner agreed out of fear, not desire. They worried that saying no would push their partner away or make the relationship feel restrictive, so they said yes even though their heart wasn't aligned with the idea. Resentment begins to build as emotional experiences start to feel uneven. One person is energized and fulfilled while the other is anxious, waiting, or hurting. Those patterns don't destroy relationships immediately, they erode them slowly. The partner who wanted openness may feel guilty for having more success, while the partner who felt pressured may begin to feel questions of their own worth. The dynamic becomes less about shared exploration and more about trying to manage emotional fallout. And over time, this imbalance becomes one of the biggest long term deal breakers, not because open relationships can't be balanced, but because most couples enter them with different levels of enthusiasm, comfort, and emotional readiness. When those differences go unaddressed, the relationship starts to tilt. And once it tilts, it's incredibly hard to level again. Emotional entanglement isn't avoidable. People often begin open relationships with the reassurance it's just physical. But human connection rarely stays in that tidy little box. We're not machines. We're emotional beings wired to bond, attach, and grow connected through shared moments, even when we don't intend to. Over time, the boundaries between physical and emotional begin to blur. Outside partners form emotional attachments. What starts as fun, flirtation, or casual intimacy can deepen into real feelings because repeated closeness creates connection. It's simply how relationships work. Secrets or softened truths start to slip in, not necessarily out of deception, but out of wanting to protect a partner from discomfort. Small omissions become emotional landmines. Comparison creeps in quietly, comparing personalities, sexual chemistry, emotional responsiveness, effort, or simply novelty of someone new. One outside partner becomes the emotional primary, even if no one planned for that shift. Emotional gravity pulls where it pulls, and it doesn't ask permission. The heart never consults the rulebook. It follows attention, energy, vulnerability, and chemistry. And once emotional entanglement takes root, the original relationship often feels destabilized, not because the love disappears, but because it becomes divided in ways that the human psyche struggles to manage over time. Time and attention get divided, and the main relationship suffers. Healthy relationships thrive on certain essentials: quality time, emotional presence, consistent communication, conflict resolution, shared experiences, effort, and intention. These aren't luxuries, they're the building blocks of intimacy and trust. Adding additional partners, even casual ones, stretches these resources thin. Your time becomes divided. Your emotional bandwidth becomes limited. Your ability to be fully present with one person diminishes because your attention is pulled in multiple directions. And even with the best intentions, something eventually gets neglected. That something is almost always the original relationship. People often underestimate the emotional labor involved in juggling multiple intimate connections. It's not just scheduling dates, it's holding space for multiple people's emotions, conflicts, expectations, and needs. Even the strongest couples find that their connection erodes when they no longer have enough time or the emotional energy reserved for one another. Intimacy fades not from lack of love, but from lack of capacity. Boundaries are hard to maintain and even harder to not break. Most open relationships begin with carefully crafted rules meant to protect both partners. Only physical, no emotional, no sleepovers. Don't see the same person more than X times. Always tell me or never tell me details. No dating friends or coworkers. Only date together as couples. On paper, these rules make perfect sense. They create structure, safety, and clarity. But real relationships, especially with new partners, don't stay inside clean lines. Over time, boundaries get tested, new partners awaken new desires, exceptions get made, just this once, small rule bends become bigger ones, and eventually the original agreements start to crumble. The moment one boundary breaks, something deeper breaks with it: trust. Not necessarily because of betrayal, but because the rules were the scaffolding holding everyone's emotions together. Even accidental boundary crossing can create a sense of instability that's difficult to repair. And once trust weakens, the entire foundation starts to shake. Long term stability often requires exclusivity. This isn't about insecurity or traditional morality, it's about emotional wiring. Long term attachment thrives on things like predictability, consistency, reliability, mutual prioritization, feeling chosen over and over again. These qualities build emotional safety. They strengthen connection. They help couples weather stress, conflict, and life transitions that are inevitable. Open relationships by design introduce a level of uncertainty that may feel exhilarating in the beginning but becomes destabilizing over time. When romantic energy is shared, the sense of being someone's clear priority becomes harder to maintain. This doesn't mean exclusivity is superior, only that most people feel happiest, safest, and most deeply connected when the relationship structure is clear, mutually prioritized, and protected. Long term commitment often requires a level of emotional focus that open relationships struggle to consistently support. Many people eventually want simplicity. Even if openness feels thrilling in the beginning, life has a way of shifting priorities. Careers become demanding. Children may enter the picture. Health challenges arise. Stress increases. Time becomes precious. And in the midst of life's complexities, maintaining multiple intimate relationships starts to feel less like freedom and more like work. What once felt liberating slowly becomes complex, exhausting, emotionally risky, time consuming, and logistically overwhelming. People grow, change, and evolve, and often what they end up craving is simplicity: one partner, one emotional home, one place to feel grounded and safe. Eventually, many couples reach a point where they no longer want multiple connections. They want closeness, clarity, and a relationship that feels centered rather than scattered. They find themselves saying, "We just want each other," not because openness failed, but because their hearts changed. Open relationships work until they don't. Open relationships aren't doomed, immoral, or inherently dysfunctional. They can absolutely work, but usually only for a very specific type of couple. The ones who make them succeed long term tend to share a rare combination of qualities: exceptional communication, the kind where you don't avoid hard conversations, you welcome them; strong emotional regulation, the ability to feel jealousy, insecurity, or fear and not let those emotions explode or take over; aligned values, not just "we both want freedom," but deep alignment on what intimacy, loyalty, boundaries, and commitment actually mean; high internal security, two people who know their worth, trust one another fully, and aren't threatened by their partner's outside connections. Lots of time and energy, because managing multiple romantic dynamics is essentially running several relationships at once. Honest, full spectrum compatibility, not just sexually or emotionally, but in lifestyle, temperament, expectations, and future goals. For couples who truly have all of these things, openness can feel expansive and liberating, but for most people, that perfect combination simply doesn't exist or can't be maintained forever. Life changes, feelings change, people change, and eventually the cracks start to show. Over the long term, open relationships often become emotionally chaotic because attachment doesn't stay neatly contained. They become unbalanced because one partner typically receives more attention, connection, or opportunities than the other. They become draining because the overwhelming energy required to manage multiple lovers, boundaries, and emotions eventually becomes overwhelming. Open relationships become very confusing because feelings shift, get blurry, and distinguishing primary from secondary gets complicated. What begins with freedom can slowly turn into friction. People in open relationships must also consider that STDs and pregnancies can happen unexpectedly. At the end of the day, most human beings crave deep, secure, prioritized connection, not because monogamy is the only correct model, but because we are wired for attachment, to feel chosen, loved, and emotionally safe with one person who is fully invested in us. And that's where many open relationships quietly start to fall short over time, not because they fail, but because humans eventually want something simpler, safer, and more emotionally anchored. Open relationships work until emotional complexity outpaces emotional capacity. And once that tipping point is reached, most couples ultimately return to the thing they were trying to evolve past: the comfort, clarity, and stability of commitment that feels exclusive, not out of obligation, but out of genuine emotional need.